Hi, I'm Jack Shilley and welcome back to another video. Finally, we're in a new month. We're in May now and the weather has finally broken, or at least we think it has. The weather is certainly a lot warmer overnight, which is key to getting things planted out in the ground. It's key to getting things prepared and moved out of the greenhouse at last, because those frosty nights should hopefully be behind us. Now, what I'm doing here, in order to make sure the soil is ready to go for me to get planting today, I'm just giving it a once over with the rake, again to remove any of these large clay clumps. If you've watched the previous garden updates, you'll know that the veg patch here is particularly bad in terms of its soil quality. So I'm just removing those at the moment, and we have had some stormy and windy weather the past couple of days with some torrential rain, so I am also using it just to get rid of some of the debris that's fallen off the trees behind, because you don't want sticks and things in the way of when you're planting. As you can probably see on the left hand side, I have planted out my Brussels sprouts. They went in a few days ago. While I'm finishing off having a bit of a tidy up here, I'm just going to show you how I planted those and what kind of spacing they need.
You're ready to plant out your Brussels sprouts when they are a decent size and have a number of true leaves. These leaves form after the first set of leaves just after germination. These are ready to be planted out, and it's important to provide your Brussels sprouts with adequate spacing. When planting in rows, make sure that you leave at least 2 feet between each plant. This applies to the row you're planting in and any other rows you might be planting next to them. This is because the plants do get quite large. Once you have finished marking out your rows, you are ready to plant your Brussels sprouts into the ground. This is a nice and easy process. Simply dig a planting hole that's slightly bigger than the pot or container that it's currently growing in. If you're planning on adding any fresh compost, make sure you mix this into the soil that you've removed from the planting hole, rather than planting directly into the fresh compost. This helps the plants establish better. Gently remove your plant from the pot or container it's currently in, ensuring that the roots, stems and leaves remain undamaged. Backfill with the soil that you have removed from the planting hole, ensuring the plant sits at the same level that it was growing in its old container. Once you have done this, gently firm in, and then it's ready for watering. As with any new plant being put in the garden, it's important to give it a really good soak after planting, unless heavy rain is forecast. This ensures they get off to the best start possible, and that's all there is to it to planting Brussels sprouts.
So that was how I planted my Brussels sprouts. What I need to do next is to get a frame up over those to protect them from any pests that are going to be coming down and laying eggs imminently. So I've also finished raking here. I'm so pleased that we're finally at a stage where we can start moving stuff out and getting stuff in the ground and getting it going. So the kind of plan for the veg plot here is to work in clusters, in groups, having the taller stuff here at the back, and then working our way down at the front. So at the front we'll have things like carrots, lettuces, beetroots, all those sorts of things that are small growing, compact growers right at the front. And as you work back, then you'd have things like your Brussels sprouts here going along the back edge. We'd have the tallest plants here, so runner beans, climbing French beans, peas towards the back section here, pumpkins and things like that probably running through the middle or maybe at an edge because they need a lot more space to romp away. So that's the kind of plan. Whether it actually looks like that in practice, I'm not sure, but certainly that's what I'm working towards at the moment. So with that in mind, I'm going to plant out my first batch of peas today. Now again, if you've watched my previous videos, you would have saw me sow those a few weeks back. They're now looking good and they're ready to go. I'm also going to plant out my climbing French beans, and I'm also going to plant out my first crop of lettuce, which will hopefully be ready in the next few weeks. So first up are my beans. These are a variety called Boston. They are in fact a more compact variety, so they're only going to grow between 40 and maybe 60 centimetres tall, so they are a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant them in this towards the back, because they are going to be on a frame, and I'm going to plant them next to the entrance of the plot here with a nice little frame, and I think they'll grow away quite happily there. It's also a little bit sunnier on this side, which is what they would prefer, to get the best crops from them. So as you can see, I grew them in these cells, which they've done really well in. We only had, out of this batch, one that didn't come through, so that's pretty good going. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plant them in a small circle with about 15, 20, maybe 30 centimetres between each. and that will be adequate room for them to start growing away without competing with each other. I'm then going to pop the frame in so that they have something to start climbing up and just provide them a bit of support, especially because we are, as I said, having a few storms and some quite windy weather at the moment, so that'll just ensure they get established properly, they've got support there, and they'll be hopefully cropping quite heavily in a few weeks' time, a bit later on in the summer. Now, what I like to try and do with these, if I'm a little bit unsure on spacing, is I will just pop the cells out. I'm just going to plop them on the soil, so that I know roughly where I'm then going to plant them. And it's just a case of digging your planting holes and making sure that they're not buried much further below the depth, if at all, where they have been growing, because that could lead to rot. So just be careful of that. And once that's done and you're all planted, you're ready to then put in your frame, which I'm going to do now. I'm using these bamboo canes, which are just under 1 metre, so that should give them ample growing height. Then the last thing on your to-do list for planting these and getting your frame in place is just to tie some string around the top here to hold it all together. Then next up on the planting list for today are the peas. Now these have struggled to germinate, as you can see. As I mentioned, they were an older batch when they went in, if you watch my earlier videos, and it has affected the germination rate quite significantly there. So we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plants there altogether, so not a huge success rate on those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plant them pretty much where I'm sat now, next to the climbing beans, because these are going to be about 1 metre tall, but I do want to leave some space at the back for the runner beans, which are of course going to be quite a bit taller. Exactly the same process to follow as we've just done. We just pop them out of the cells, plant them in however you want. So I'm going to go for a circle again, but you could plant them in rows with canes supporting them. These will grow to about 1 metre in height, this Onward variety. They do need these slightly bigger canes, but as I said, you can plant them in rows, you could plant them in circles, you could even grow them in tubs. They'd be okay for that. Just them all planted, and then same principle again, build your frame, tie it off at the top, and job done. The last plant I'm going to be planting out into the veg patch itself today are these lettuce plants, and this is a variety called All the Year Round. Been left in this seed tray a little bit longer than I would have liked, so they are a little bit bigger. Normally you'd want to be putting them out into the ground and giving them adequate space before they get a chance to grow their first set of really big true leaf. Just bear that in mind. What I'm going to be doing, because they're quite compact plants, I'm going to be running them right along this front edge here, giving them adequate space. They need about 30 centimetres between each one. That's the length of a standard ruler, just to make sure again they're not competing for nutrients and that they've got adequate access to water and space to grow and spread. So these form small heads that are then harvest once and then gone. So what I'll do is, once I've planted out my first row of these, I'll then pop the seed tray back into the greenhouse with some fresh compost in, some fresh seed, so I've got a successional sowing, so that hopefully by the time those are nearly ready to harvest in a couple of weeks' time, the next batch is ready to be planted out, and so on and so forth, so we have a fresh supply of lettuce right the way through the season. Now these are really easy to plant. All you need to do is tip them out of the seed tray, be very gentle with them to prise them apart from one another. They don't mind root disturbance too much, but you want to try and get as much of the root as you can. Then I'm going to dig a very small drill all along the front, as I said here, and just pop them in at 30 centimetre intervals, and it's as simple as that with lettuce. Really quick and really easy. That's probably enough for me to get started with. There's plenty of plants in here, 2 rows I'm going to go with to begin with. If you have got leftovers like this, You could just give them to your neighbours, or you could add more rows, obviously depending on how much lettuce you eat. But also you could just cut this now, use it in salads, sandwiches, etc. At this young leaf stage. It's absolutely fine to eat, and then you haven't had any wastage, and then, as I said, you're ready to use the seed tray again to get your next batch off and started. And really that's it for this week's video. I've shown you what we're up to. We've got the Brussels sprouts planted, we've got the peas planted now just behind me, the climbing beans, the lettuce out. There's a lot more planting to be done, but not at the moment. It just needs another couple of days to make sure the weather isn't going to drop off in terms of overnight temperatures. Things like the pumpkins and some petunias and bits and pieces like that. So I'm keeping an eye on the forecast. As with anything newly planted out, make sure you give it a really good soak unless heavy rain is forecast, which it is in the case of today. It's just starting now. And make sure that you are constantly checking them for sort of slug damage, snail damage, especially at this young stage. Make sure you're keeping an eye on that. I'll be back, well, more regularly definitely now, as I always say, because there's just so much going on now that temperatures has improved. So we can get out and get planting and get growing, and there's lots of great things that I've got coming up. I've got wisterias planting in containers, as I said, some petunias to go out, loads of stuff happening. So do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on those video updates. All the links to my social channels are in the box below as well, so you can keep up to date with everything that's happening, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks very much for watching.